everyone, welcome back to the Nello Reads channel. Our first malicious compliance story of the day comes from KRLW890. Give a biography on this person who, by the way, doesn't exist. This happened long enough ago in college that I feel okay sharing it now. A little while ago, I was taking this one ethics course that was required for my major, and it had the most insufferable professor. First of all, it was a college ethics course, so there's your first red flag. Secondly, it was only taught by one professor who used his own textbook for the course. For the first half of the semester, I thought he was a bit of a pain, but tolerable. It helped that my expectations were low. Then, the midterm came up. It was an online course, so we were allowed and expected to use notes/internet during the exam. I eventually got to this one question, which went something like this. According to name of person, quote by person, do you agree and why? Give a brief biography on the person. Having never heard of him before, I looked him up, getting exactly 3 relevant results. The first was just the question verbatim. The other 2 were questions on Q&A sites asking who this person was. One had no activity. The other had one answer. He doesn't exist. Well, he exists, just not by that name. If you're asking this question, you already know who he is. What the actual F? I would learn later that this person's name was literally an anagram of our professor's name, which is why I'm censoring that in addition to his real name. So I can only assume the question was both asked and answered by him in advance, but I didn't know that at the time. Well, this would have been a funny joke if it was framed as an extra credit bonus question. It wasn't. It was a serious, graded question on our midterm, with no indication whatsoever that the biography portion of the question wasn't serious. At a complete loss for words, I decided, fine, you want a biography for a person who doesn't exist? I'll give you one. After my actual serious response to the quote, I ended up writing this masterpiece of BS. Fake anagram name, born as Lucas Schmidt, which was a random name I made up, was born in the backwater alleys of Ursprung, Germany in 1954. Impoverished and orphaned by the age of 4, he was taken in by the German mafia for his pickpocketing skills. Raised to be merely a tool for the mafia, he scored his first kill by the age of 6. This would perhaps be the origin story of some sociopathic serial killer, but everything changed for young Schmidt in 1964, when he stumbled upon a copy of Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who. Touched by its inspiring words, Schmidt had, for the first time, experienced actual human emotion, and now that he had a taste, he knew he could never go back. He fled from the German mafia and hid away in Switzerland, studying literature and philosophy. He began to write about our course's specific branch of ethics under the pen name, fake anagram name, so as to avoid recognition by the German mafia, with hopes of indirectly undermining them without drawing attention to himself. And while this story may seem fantastical, it is at least more interesting than he doesn't exist. This ended up being longer than the serious answer I gave on my response to the quote. My professor ended up giving me extra points for making him laugh, so at least he had a sense of humor. I was kind of expecting the professor to just blow up on OP. Someone who comes up with a quote, makes a fake person using their own name, and then asks their students to write about them sounds beyond insane. Unless it was one big joke, which I'll assume what the professor was going for based on his response to OP's essay. Our next story comes from ChefDad64. You believe residents should get priority over street parking? Okay, no problem. I live on a cul-de-sac where I rent a back house from my landlords. There's another elderly tenant who lived inside the landlord's house I was very close with that we'll call Good Sir. I have these neighbors next to me who I had gotten along with for as long as I had lived there. Before the pandemic, the husband, we'll call him Mr. Chill, has been very cool with me. My neighbors have 3 cars between them. 2 belong to Mr. Chill and his wife, we'll call her Mrs. Hypocrite. The other car belongs to their daughter. We'll call her the Hog. When the pandemic hit, Mr. Chill's family, for reasons that didn't make sense to me, suddenly stopped parking their cars in the driveway, and would park them all on the curb in front of their house. as well as the hog taking the spot I usually parked in more so than her parents did. Finally, after a few months of this going on, I see the hog outside and ask her if she wouldn't mind sharing the spot that I used to park at. I explain my situation with being overworked and exhausted from my job. She gives me an annoyed look and just responds by saying, "I use it." I realize I'm wasting my time, tell her never mind, and go inside. Not even 5 minutes later, there is a knock at the door, and it's good sir letting me know that the neighbors want to talk with me. Mrs. Hypocrite is standing there all pissed looking, asking me what the problem is. I explain to Mrs. Hypocrite what I said to the hog, and she apologizes for coming off so angry, and says, "You know, street parking is what it is, it's first come first serve, and we're not parking to try and give anyone a hard time." The conversation goes nowhere, but we end it peacefully. About a week later, I'm parked in my spot for a change, and my girlfriend comes over to visit with our child. It's summertime and it's hot. Towards the evening, I get a knock on the door, and it's good sir. He says the neighbors wanted to talk, and I see Mr. Chill standing right there. He just asks if my girlfriend could move her car, because she's got a bunch of curb behind her car, but not enough for another car to fit. Before I can even say anything, Mrs. Hypocrite shows up out of nowhere. "I'm sick of going back and forth about this. She is double parked and there's not enough room for another car to fit. I understand that she's your girlfriend and she's visiting, but I believe that residents should get priority parking first. It looks like you guys are trying to save the parking for yourselves, and I'm not dealing with this anymore. She needs to move her car." I'm in complete shock and have a lot I wanted to say, but I don't, and just go inside to ask my girlfriend to move. She thinks they're hypocrites and moves just because she feels like that's all they have to feel proud of in their lives. The only reason I gave in to them is just so my landlords do not get involved and risk it turning into them not wanting to renew my lease with me. Otherwise, I would have said something. Funny enough, even though they got pissed at my girlfriend for double parking, the hog is the queen of doing that on our cul-de-sac without Mrs. Hypocrite telling her anything. Last year, in November, good sir wasn't doing too well and went into hospice care, eventually passing away unfortunately. He gave me his car as a gift and a thank you for being family to him. I now had 2 cars, 2 spots, and an idea. Enter petty malicious compliance. Mrs. Hypocrite said that street parking is first come first serve, and that residents should have priority. Well then, so be it. I only need to use 1 car, and the other can just stay parked. Since I am a resident, I decided to park whichever car I am not using in the spot that I would normally park at and swap them out every 2 weeks in rotation. My girlfriend parks where good sir used to. The hog, her boyfriend, and Mrs. Hypocrite have not touched that spot since I started doing this, since one of my 2 cars is always there. As a little bonus, Mrs. Hypocrite put one of their cars they aren't using back in the driveway, and when there's a party going on and all the parking is taken up, the spot in front of their house is sometimes open. And since, again, I am a resident and the guests have taken all the other spots, well, I guess I do need a spot to park at after all, right? Sorry, Mrs. Hypocrite and or the hog. I guess you'll just have to park around the block and take a nice walk to get to your house. I'm only following what you believe the parking rules should be. Rest in peace, good sir. I miss you every single day. I'll always love you as my own family. This story sort of has me thinking, like, why would good sir leave him a car? Like, of all the things to leave him, why the car? And honestly, I think it's because of this whole situation. You know, he was maybe trying to get back at the neighbors too. Let me know what you think in the comments. And since it's on the way down there, you could also press the like button. I'd appreciate it. Our next story comes from Celestine Noxa. Want me to vacuum your hand? Okay. This happened when I was a kid, maybe 11 or 12 years old. We had a black lab puppy named Ralph. At first, we kept him inside, but once he got bigger and more destructive, they ended up putting him outside to be an outside dog. This is the country in the South, so while not the safest for pets, it's not unusual in this area. One day, while he was still an inside puppy, Ralph got a hold of some kind of paper. I forget what kind, but something like paper towels or toilet paper. Whatever it was, he shredded it all over the living room carpet. My stepdad was pretty angry about it, but puppy gonna puppy, right? Since technically Ralph was my puppy, He was a gift to me for Christmas, but they named him and he was really their dog. My stepdad insisted I vacuum up the shredded paper. This is a story for another subreddit, but let's just say my whole family is cursed when it comes to vacuum cleaners. I take out the vacuum, plug it in, turn it on, and start running it over the shredded paper. It's definitely on, but I can tell after just a few swipes that it's not picking up anything. I turn it off and tell my stepdad, who grumbles and tells me to turn it back on and try again while he watches. I do. It's still not picking anything up. He tells me to tilt it back so he can see what the mechanism is doing while it's on. I do. That apparently isn't enough. The next thing my stepdad does is place his hand flat on the carpet, and he tells me, a 12-year-old, to run the vacuum over his hand so he can feel whether it's sucking or not. I'm 12, but I'm pretty sure this is a bad idea. Are you sure? Yeah, go on. I'm still sure it's a bad idea, but I'm 12 and he's my stepdad, and he's a jerk most of the time anyway. So I mentally shrug and proceed to do what he told me to do. Immediately, he shouts and pulls back, and I can already see there's a lot of blood on his hand. He's cursing and holding his hand and obviously in a lot of pain. 3 of his fingers start swelling and turning purple almost instantly, and he's bleeding from at least 2 of them. He ends up losing 2 of the fingernails. Later, my mom came home from work, and I ran outside to tell her the story first to make sure she knew it was not my fault. To his credit, this was one of the very rare times my stepdad admitted it was his own fault and I was just doing what he told me to do. He was more than a jerk. He was abusive in basically every way it's possible to be abusive. So losing 2 fingernails painfully is the least of what he deserved. That's so brutal. Like, my whole body was clenching up reading the fingernail thing. But hey, maybe that got the vacuum cleaner to work. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and I'll see you next time.